Hello, I'm Simon Whistler, you're watching TopTenzNet, and in the video today we're looking at the top 10 horrifyingly dumb butt dials. Butt dials or pocket dials are a fairly common occurrence in contemporary society. You've probably done it yourself, and you've probably received one. Most of the time these calls are harmless, and at most it's annoying. However, it doesn't always go that way. Some people have made butt dials that have caused serious problems. Number 10. David Grimsby and Robert Bourne. In December of 2016, the Danville, Kentucky 911 dispatch got a phone call. When they asked what type of help the caller needed, no one responded. Instead, the dispatcher heard two men going over the logistics of robbing a local barbecue restaurant. The dispatcher let an officer know and told the chief of police, who was dining at the barbecue restaurant when the butt dial came in. They were able to triangulate the position of the car and found David Grimsby and Robert Bourne in the car in the parking lot of the restaurant. They were arrested, and luckily for them, they were released after being charged with only public intoxication. Number 9. Papa John's employee. In May 2013, an unnamed Papa John's delivery driver in Sanford, Florida, delivered pizza totaling $15.26, which included the delivery charge. The African-American customer gave the driver a 21% tip, which is pretty generous to give a guy who just drove a few miles and walked a pizza to a door. After dropping off the pizza and returning to work, the delivery driver's phone dialed the last number contacted, which happened to be the customer. The call went to voicemail, and when the customer listened to the voicemail, he was justifiably appalled. On the voicemail, you hear a co-worker asking if the driver got a tip, and there are a few ways he could have gone with this. For example, he could have just been honest and said yes, or he could have told his co-worker to mind his own business. Instead, the driver chose to use the customer's generosity as a way to be incredibly racist. On the voicemail, in a mocking tone, he says, "I guess that's one of the requirements of being a N-word in Sanford. They gave me $5. They're fine, outstanding gentlemen of the African-American community." After needlessly insulting the customer for giving him a generous tip, we might add, the driver then goes on to keep using the N-word multiple times and even sings 2 songs that only use the N-word and other swear words while his co-worker laughs. The customer posted the video on YouTube, and this led to the driver being fired. The CEO of Papa John's even heard about the incident and responded to it, saying that the behavior and the language was completely unacceptable. Number 8. Donna Knope, Jasonlope, and Tomas Stallings. If you've ever seen Breaking Bad, you know that where you set up your meth lab is really important. Secondly, you have to do everything possible to avoid drawing attention to it, and definitely do not want to do anything that could possibly lead the police there. 3 people who didn't follow these simple basic rules were Donna Knope, 55, her son Jasonlope, 32, and Tomas Stallings, 41, all of Orlando, Florida. One of these wannabe Heisenberg somehow managed to pocket down 911, and over the next half hour, while the dispatcher listened to the call and traced it, the trio talked about cooking and selling meth. The dispatcher could hear bubbling in the background. When the police went to the location of the call, they found the trio in a shed behind the Knopes' house cooking meth, and all 3 were arrested on drug charges. Amateurs. Walter White had 2 cell phones and a DEA agent in his contact list, and this was never a problem for him. Number 7. John Elias Taylor III. In June of 2016, an unidentified woman dropped her son off at the home of 27-year-old John Elias Taylor III in Mississippi so that Taylor could babysit the boy. A short time later, the mother received a horrifying call from Taylor's cell phone. It was a pocket dial, but the mother could hear her son begging not to be whipped anymore. The mother called the police, who went to the house and discovered bruising on the child that shouldn't have been there. Taylor was arrested and charged with felony child abuse. So let there be a lesson to you. If you are going to beat children, make sure you don't have your cell phone on you. Just kidding, please don't beat any children. Number 6. Unidentified Teacher in Winnetka, Illinois. Winnetka is a small upscale village that's located 16 miles north of downtown Chicago. It's one of the richest towns in the United States, notable for being home to the house in Home Alone. Needless to say, it's a place where crime is pretty rare, unless the wet bandits are on the loose again. But the town got quite a scare in January 2011 when the wife of a middle school teacher got a phone call from her husband's cell phone. He was supposed to be on his way home, and she heard what sounded like a struggle and a man threatening him, so she called 911. 30 police officers went to the school and surrounded it for the next 3 hours. While local residents watched on, the officers swept the school looking for the teacher and the man that was threatening him. As you probably gathered, the teacher was not in any danger. Fortunately, it was just a butt dial. The threatening voice she heard was simply some hip-hop music that the teacher was listening to while he drove home. There were no charges because there was no intent to deceive the police. In fact, the police said that they were thankful they got some training in the field. Number 5. Jamie Sniffen, Alan Slavin, and Larry Graff. One night in February of 2013, 39-year-old Jamie Sniffen of Cortland, New York, left the home she shared with her live-in boyfriend, Alan Slavin, while he was asleep. She was headed to meet up with her lover, Larry Graff. After taking the taxi over to Graff's house, Sniffen sat on the phone and accidentally called her sleeping boyfriend. Oops. He was awoken by the call, and according to Sniffen, Slavin heard everything. Slavin figured out that Sniffen was at Graff's house. Graff and Slavin were friends, and he took a taxi over. Over there, Sniffen let her boyfriend into her lover's house and admitted to the affair. However, Graff kept denying it, and this only got Slavin angry, so the two men argued. The fighting riled up Graff's pit bull, so Slavin grabbed a knife and a pellet gun to defend himself. Sniffen put the dog in a bedroom, while Slavin and Graff continued to argue. Things got violent when Graff picked up a 3-foot speaker and hit Slavin with it. This caused Slavin to accidentally cut his wrist with a knife, so he whacked Graff several times with the pellet gun. After the melee, Sniffen and Slavin left the house and went back home. However, several hours later, Graff called 911 and was taken to the hospital where he underwent surgery for a punctured liver. The police arrested Sniffen for hitting Graff, and Slavin was arrested for misdemeanor hindering prosecution for cleaning up the blood from the cut wrist. Sniffen was amazed that Graff was hurt that bad, saying of her rotund lover, "I don't understand how that could happen because Larry is huge. He's like 600 pounds. Number 4. Larry Barnett. In 2013, Jonesboro, Arkansas, used car lot owner Larry Barnett was being investigated by the police and the Secret Service for defrauding a bank out of $80,000. In May of that year, a former employee of Barnett's came into the police station because of a disturbing butt dial he had received. The call was from Barnett, and he was talking to a hitman he had hired to kill the employee that he was calling. Barnett said that he wanted the death to look like an accident, and specifically said, "I don't care if you have to burn his house to the ground with him in it." After the man filed a report with the police, he went home and found evidence of a break-in. Someone had tampered with his gas stove, so apparently this particular hitman was open to Barnett's ideas. Barnett was arrested for conspiracy to commit murder and 2 felony counts of forgery. Number 3. Scott Simon, Michael Depre, and Ronel Desinor. In the early morning hours of May 5, 2013, 27-year-old Scott Simon and 33-year-old Nicholas Walker got into an argument at a Waffle House in Orlando, Florida. May 5th was a Sunday, and since it was early morning, we'll let you guess what the men had been doing before they got to the Waffle House. The argument between the two men escalated, and Simon grabbed a fire extinguisher while Walker grabbed a wet floor sign. During the confrontation, Simon's girlfriend dialed 911 and it connected, but she hung up because neither men threw a punch. However, when she put the phone in her purse, it reconnected to 911. The operator listened to the open line and recorded Simon talking about how he was going to kill Walker. Minutes after leaving the Waffle House, Simon's friend Michael Depre arrived with Ronel Desinor in the passenger seat. They followed Walker as he drove away from the Waffle House. When they pulled up beside his car, they opened fire and Walker was killed. The 911 purse dial led back to the 3 men. They were arrested, convicted, and each were given life sentences. Number 2. Li Xiangnan. Li Xiangnan met a young woman named Shou Tong in 2011, where they were both taking a class test of English as a foreign language in Beijing. Xiangnan was already at the Rochester Institute of Technology, but when Tong got accepted to Iowa State University, Xiangnan transferred to the University of Iowa, which was about 140 miles away in Iowa City. In the summer of 2013, Xiangnan moved into Tong's dorm room, but by the end of the summer, things were getting rocky. On September 3rd, Tong accidentally pocket-dialed Xiangnan while Xiangnan listened in. Tong badmouthed him to another guy without realizing he could hear the entire conversation. Obviously, Xiangnan was upset by this. Who wouldn't be? But instead of eating ice cream and listening to The Cure like a normal person, Xiangnan strangled the 20-year-old woman and stuffed her body in the trunk of her car. After killing her, Xiangnan bought a one-way ticket to China and flew home. Tong's body wouldn't be found until several weeks later. Back in China, Xiangnan was arrested and tried for the murder, making it a very rare cooperation between Chinese and American law enforcement agencies. He pleaded guilty and was sentenced to life in prison, which could be reduced to 13 years. Number 1. Jason Bourne. On June the 26th, 2012, the battered dead body of 27-year-old Danielle Tomas was found in a bathtub full of ice in her apartment in Astoria, New York. She had died of blunt force trauma and strangulation. At the scene, there was a note from her boyfriend, 34-year-old Jason Bourne. He had said that he came home drunk and they got into a fight, and he didn't remember what happened after that. He turned himself in after a few days on the run, and when he talked to the police, he said that the murder was an accident. When they went to trial, his lawyers argued that since Thomas's death was an accident, Bourne should only be guilty of manslaughter and not first-degree murder. Except there was only one problem with his story. One of their cell phones, the police didn't say if it belonged to Bourne or Tomas, pocket dialed, leaving one of their friends a voicemail recording of the murder. On the voicemail, Bourne demands to know while Tomas called a certain area code. When she gives him an answer that he doesn't like, he attacks her, and you can hear her getting punched and choked. When Bourne tells her to answer the question, he says, "This is your life." And Tomas responds, "I know." Tomas begs for her life, but Bourne strangled her and said, "Danielle, you don't have a lot of time." This haunting voicemail was played in court and clearly showed that Thomas's death was not an accident. Bourne was sentenced to life in prison without the chance of parole. So I really hope you liked that video. If you did, please do hit that thumbs up button below, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already for brand new videos just like this every day of the week. Also, over there on the right, a couple of other videos that you might enjoy if you enjoyed this one, and thank you for watching.